Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing The Woman in the Window. This film is directed by Joe Wright. I've never been a big fan of Joe Wright's work. He's the kind of director who is very kind of flowery and very aesthetically driven without a lot of substance to back it up. No real dimension to things. It's more kind of pretty for the sake of being pretty or, for the sake of being showy. Though I do admire aspects of the aesthetic when it comes to the detail of things because it's not random. It is well thought out, at least on a surface level. And this film is based on a novel, but it's more kind of a ripoff in terms of how they're going for it here of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, which is a film that is, a suspense murder mystery in the same way, but it's the study of the act of voyeurism. It's a study in the act of what it means to watch a film from an audience's standpoint. It's like this means of controlled escapism, and perhaps the toxic implications of that controlled escapism. And that's always been a really fascinating idea for me in terms of Rear Window as a film. But this film is fueled by that. It is fueled by a lot of staples of the past, particularly cinema from, the golden age of Hollywood. Though I don't think that nostalgia is explored in a very interesting way compared to something, of course, like Rear Window or even something like Blue Velvet, which is very similar. But it employs it at least. And I think that's why I didn't hate this film. I didn't loathe it with every fiber of my being. I didn't like it, don't get me wrong. It's not a good movie. It's not offensive, it's just mediocre, I think. Yet it had some aspects to it that I found somewhat intriguing, at least on a surface level. I think a big part of it is that this film is just stunning. I mean, it is really surprisingly beautiful. I mean, to the point where, I've seen a lot of Netflix movies lately, and they always feel very imitation, like a film like I Care a Lot, which is very aesthetically driven. Yet it felt completely slapped together in imitation. I talked about that in my review, but this film, in contrast, there is so much detail, and it is absolutely stunning to look at. I wanted to freeze frame every moment of it, every single shot, and just hang it on my wall. Every shot is meant to kind of look like an Edward Hopper painting. Lots of long shots that give you that isolated feeling for the main character. And she's constantly isolated in the frame, and it just looks like everything is very all-encompassing, and she's just like one little piece of it. And the colors often have that very kind of rosy, aged look that feels like it's almost out of like an Italian film. And then there's, of course, neon colors aplenty, a la Suspiria. I do feel like the neon aesthetic is absolutely done to death in this A24 era that we're in, I think. But yet I don't mind it here because of how well it's employed. Every color feels just right, and it feels like it works absolutely for the composition. Even though a film like this is not as good as a lot of the films it's paying homage to, it at least understands them, understands the composition, understands the aesthetic of it. And the noir elements, the shadow and the light, all of it is just very, very strong. Hopper paintings are, as I said, meant to be about isolation, and we are in an age of isolation, so I think that ties into our modern day as well as the nostalgia aspects of the past. There's also a very fluid and controlled element to the cinematography, to the camera work that I think is very interesting. There are moving shots that I found to be quite creative, quite surprising, interesting transitions that were quite clever. I think just more artful than I expected. But a lot of this film does center on the main character, who is played by Amy Adams here, and whether or not she is perhaps perceiving reality incorrectly, because she has clearly some mental issues. She is a psychiatrist, but she's also agoraphobic. And she sees a psychiatrist, I think, 3 times a week. She can't leave her house. She's on medications. And she's also drinking quite heavily while being on the medications. And they do weave the surrealistic elements very slowly into the movie as you kind of start to wonder whether or not she is crazy or not. And I think they do that really well, and I enjoyed it. Yet naturally, you do have a story here that I think could be very interesting in the right hands with somebody who could handle real meat and potatoes of a story and the drama and the meaning. But it is just bland, unfortunately, and it's not particularly gripping, even though it should be, because it is a suspense sort of thriller. And rather than really shaking up a lot of those genre staples that it is using in the film to subvert our expectations, it really plays it very safe. Ultimately, it's very disappointing in the end of it, but I still have to admire a bit, at least, the sense of humor about it. It does recognize, or seems that Joe Wright recognizes the ridiculousness a little bit. The melodramatic elements, the conscious romanticism of nostalgia and of the cinema. They even have old Hollywood films playing constantly throughout the movie that our main character has memorized. By blending a lot of those pastiche elements, the pulpy melodrama and that artsy flair. It's almost like it reveals how this escapism, the escapism of film and entertainment, can sometimes be hard to distinguish from reality. I just wish that the film was well written so that a lot of these ideas could, come forward in a really resonant sort of way. And the characters in this film, all of the side characters they're just pointed devices. They all have to have something very off, very mysterious about them, very quirky. Often red herrings, meant to manipulate us, of course, but it's the way that it's done. It is so overt and so obvious and just downright ridiculous, but ridiculous again in a way that has a cheekiness to it. So it reminds me a little bit of like the movies of Brian De Palma or even Douglas Sirk. It's like the cheapness of that and the pastiche blending, but this feels like a bad version of that. You have a lot of great actors as well in this movie, very renowned actors, which I find to be very funny that they all decided to be a part of this film. Maybe it's because Joe Wright is attached, I'm really not sure. But I do understand, these kinds of characters really need great actors to play them, to make them memorable. Gary Oldman is hilarious in this film. He is really just hamming it up. He is going so over the top. He seems to completely understand the silliness, the humor of everything, and he just doesn't give a shit. He's going almost like pure farce, pure comedy, it seems, at certain points, and I kind of love it. I have to admit, I found myself laughing out loud. Even if it's not particularly intelligent humor, it kept my interest in that aspect. The third act of this film really, unfortunately though, lacks a lot of tension. And the cliches, I think, just become too generic at that point where I felt completely removed from it. A lot of the artfulness and the humor of it is just kind of drained by that point in a way that it feels like it's trying to wrap everything up. Before this, there was at least a stylistic cheekiness to it that kept me going, at least, again, on a surface level. And all that really does is just show how much we rely on aesthetic as a sort of mask to cover up that we don't have very interesting stories or very well-written core stories. And it makes me sad how aesthetically driven we are. Just because there's great cinematography does not necessarily mean it's a good film. This film, I think, absolutely could have been interesting, and it could have built climactically, and it could have really gone for a lot of the humor that I think it was capable of. It could have explored so many aspects of voyeurism as well that could have been fresh, and it could have been interesting from a new perspective. But no, it's just kind of lethargic overall, and especially in that third act, everything just deflates. Really deflates. I really wouldn't recommend this film unless you're a big Joe Wright fan, or if you're just really into like aesthetically driven type films. I really think that this will maintain your interest, at least on that level, because it is, as I said, absolutely stunning to look at. But if you really want to see a film that really tackles voyeurism and is suspenseful and very interesting, just watch Rear Window. Don't waste your time with this. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to go ahead and plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I sell commissioned portraits and prints of my work. And if that's something you're interested in, you can always go to the website and go to the shop below. And if you want a commission or you have any questions, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. I'd also like to give a shout out to my patrons. You guys are wonderful as always. And if you would like to support, the link is below in the description box, as well as my social media information. You can watch more videos here and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.